The crystal chandeliers above the ballroom flickered like captured stars, throwing fractured light across the crowd of Louisville's elite. The Harrington estate had never looked grander. Velvet drapes, gold-rimmed champagne flutes, a quartet playing soft Vivaldi in the corner. It was supposed to be a celebration of my parents' 40 years of marriage, a night for toasts and laughter. Instead, it became the night they finally erased me. I stood at their side, glass in hand, pretending to belong in their world of rehearsed smiles and calculated gestures. My father, Richard Harrington, a man whose handshake had brokered multi-million-dollar deals, tapped his glass for silence. My mother, Evelyn, with her diamond necklace gleaming against a dress the shade of midnight, rested her hand lightly on his arm as if steadying him. And then, with the precision of a dagger sliding between ribs, they said it. "We wish Clara had never been born." The words were soft, almost conversational, but they fell with the weight of a cathedral bell. Gasps rippled through the hall. The quartet stumbled to a stop, bows hanging midair. The sound of glass meeting marble echoed from somewhere behind me. For a moment, time stilled. I stared at their faces, calm, faintly smiling, as though this cruelty had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. My chest should have caved in, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a strange clarity, the kind that comes when the storm finally breaks and the air turns sharp with electricity. I lifted my chin, placed my glass carefully on the nearest table, and spoke without a quiver. "If that is what you wish," I said, each syllable deliberate, "then consider me as if I never existed." I didn't wait for their reaction. I turned and walked across the polished marble floor, my heels clicking like a metronome marking the end of a symphony. The silence parted around me, guests stepping back as though I carried fire. Behind me, whispers ignited, frantic and hungry, spreading faster than any flame. But I didn't look back. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and freeing. I slid into the waiting car, instructed the driver to leave, and let the mansion grow smaller in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. 1 missed call. 2. By the time we reached the city limits, there were 21. Messages pinged with desperation. My parents, my brother Michael, even family friends demanding explanations. But ghosts do not answer phones. As the skyline loomed ahead, I thought of the years that had led to this moment. Growing up in the Harrington household had always meant living on a knife's edge. Love was conditional, meted out like rations during wartime. Achievements were never celebrated, only scrutinized. My grades dissected, my friendships questioned, my choices ridiculed. My father's words were scalpels, sharp and precise, cutting away at any sense of worth. My mother's cruelty was quieter, disguised as concern, but poisonous all the same. I used to wonder why I stayed, why I kept trying, like a moth slamming into glass, desperate for light that would never be mine. The truth is simple. Children hope. We hope our parents will notice us, protect us, love us. We cling to crumbs and call them meals, mistaking survival for affection. But that night at the gala, as their words echoed in my skull, I realized the truth. I had never been their daughter. I had been their project, their scapegoat, their excuse. Yet beneath the sting of humiliation, a deeper current ran through me, calm, calculated. Because unlike them, I had rehearsed too. My exit was not just a reaction, it was the opening act. For months I had prepared for this moment. And as the mansion's glow faded behind me, I knew the trap was already in motion. The city lights blurred outside the car window, streaks of neon and gold against the dark glass. My phone still buzzed relentlessly, but I ignored it. Each vibration was nothing more than an echo of the life I had just left behind. My parents thought their words had crushed me. What they didn't know was that they had only punctuated the ending of a story I had already decided to rewrite. As the car sped through the night, memories unfolded uninvited, like reels of film I could no longer pause. Childhood in the Harrington household had never been gentle. It was a theater of roles where I was cast as the failure before I could even speak. My father, Richard, demanded excellence, but offered none of the nurturing that makes achievement possible. He believed emotions were weaknesses, calling them luxuries for the mediocre. Every conversation with him felt like standing trial, my worth measured against impossible expectations. Evelyn, my mother, was different but no less destructive. Her cruelty was sugar-coated, spoken in soft tones meant to disguise the venom underneath. If I brought home a drawing from school, she'd smile faintly and say, "It's good practice, darling, but your brother's work has so much more potential." If I shared excitement about a small success, she would place her hand on mine and whisper, "Don't get carried away. Pride makes people careless." Every word was a thread pulling at the seams of my confidence until I doubted whether I deserved pride at all. And then there was Michael, my older brother, the golden child. He could do no wrong. If he stumbled, it was excused as ambition. If he failed, it was reframed as resilience. Our parents lauded him with praise so effusive it drowned out any acknowledgement that I existed. At family dinners, conversations revolved around his grades, his sports victories, his charm. My chair felt more like a shadow's perch, an afterthought at a table where applause was reserved for one. The favoritism became more than emotional, it was financial. When Michael turned 21, my parents celebrated with the down payment on his first investment property. I remember standing in the driveway as they unveiled it, a sleek modern townhouse with a ribbon tied across the door. Meanwhile, my trust fund, the one set aside by my grandfather specifically for my education and future, was drained quietly to cover Michael's reckless ventures. Startups that failed within months, debts hidden behind shell companies. Each time my parents told me it was a family sacrifice. What they meant was that I was the sacrifice. I tried to leave once. After graduating college, I accepted a job offer in another state. For a few months, I tasted freedom. But Evelyn called constantly, weaving guilt into every word. Richard reminded me of the debt they had put in my name, the loans I supposedly owed, because family shares everything. And Michael, always Michael, needed me to be supportive. So I returned, trapped by financial chains I hadn't forged and emotional ones I couldn't yet sever. Sitting in that car after the gala, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire life hoping for their approval, but they had given me clarity instead. By declaring to the world that they wished I had never been born, they granted me permission to finally stop begging for crumbs. Yet clarity was not enough. Justice was necessary. Years of humiliation, manipulation, and theft demanded more than silent escape. They demanded reckoning. And for the first time, I had the strength and the evidence to deliver it. Because in the months leading to the gala, I had found the documents. Hidden away in Richard's locked filing cabinet, buried beneath layers of tax returns and corporate files, lay the truth. Forged signatures, drained accounts, loans stacked in my name without my consent. They had gambled my future. And worse, they believed I would never find out. But I had. And unlike the powerless child they thought I remained, I wasn't going to forgive. Not this time. I still remember the night I found the evidence. It was late autumn, the kind of evening where the wind rattled the windows like impatient fingers. Richard had left for one of his networking dinners, Evelyn was at the spa, and Michael was God knows where burning through another loan in my name. I should have been asleep, but rest had long abandoned me in that house. Instead, I wandered into Richard's study, a room I had been forbidden from since childhood. The air smelled of leather and cigars, heavy with the arrogance of power. Dark mahogany shelves towered above me, lined with books that looked read only for display. His desk gleamed under the desk lamp, immaculate except for a set of keys he had carelessly left behind. One of them had a brass tag etched with numbers. My pulse quickened. I had seen that number before, on the locked filing cabinet shoved into the corner. My hands trembled as I slid the key in. The click of the lock echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. Inside, I found folders thick with documents, files organized with ruthless precision. And there, in black and white, was my undoing. And theirs. Loans. Multiple. All in my name. My signature forged with terrifying accuracy, down to the slant of the A in Clara. My scholarship fund, the one my grandfather had safeguarded for me, had been cashed out years ago. Worse, the money was funneled into shell companies connected to Harrington Enterprises, companies that had no employees, no products, just bank accounts bleeding funds. At first, disbelief pinned me to the floor. I reread every page, searching for some mistake, some other explanation. But the truth was undeniable. They hadn't just sabotaged my future, they had stolen it. The next morning, I confronted them. I placed the documents on the dining table, between Richard's untouched coffee and Evelyn's half-sipped glass of pomegranate juice. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it. You used me. You ruined everything I worked for. My name. My future. It's all tainted because of you. Richard barely glanced at the papers. Stop being dramatic, Clara. Family shares everything. Evelyn sighed, her tone soft and venomous. Ungrateful, that's what you are. We've given you a roof, a name, protection. And you dare accuse us? After everything we've sacrificed? Her words sliced deeper than Richard's dismissive glare. Sacrificed. That was their favorite word, their justification for every cruelty. They sacrificed my trust fund for Michael. They sacrificed my scholarship for their business. They sacrificed my dignity at every turn. And still, I was expected to smile and call it love. That night, I sat awake in my room, the documents spread across my bed like the wreckage of a ship. I cried until there were no tears left, until the ache in my chest hollowed into something sharper, something colder. I realized I couldn't save what was left of our relationship, but I could expose what they had done. If they wanted to brand me as ungrateful, as non-existent, then so be it. They would learn what it meant to erase me, because from that night on, I stopped being their child. I became their reckoning. The plan didn't come overnight. It grew slowly, methodically. I copied every document, scanned every page, and stored them in places Richard and Evelyn would never think to look. Encrypted drives, cloud accounts under pseudonyms. I reached out to an old friend, a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes. His reaction told me everything. Clara, if this comes out, your parents won't just lose money, they'll lose everything. Those words lodged in my mind like a promise, and I intended to keep it. The weeks that followed were a blur of strategy and secrecy. By day, I played the dutiful daughter, my silence mistaken for surrender. By night, I became an archivist of their crimes. I pieced together emails they thought deleted, contracts signed under fake subsidiaries, and transaction records leading from shell accounts to luxury purchases that Evelyn flaunted at charity luncheons. Every detail became part of a puzzle, and when completed, it painted a portrait not of success but of theft, greed, and betrayal. I learned quickly that silence was my ally. If Richard or Evelyn suspected I was digging, they would bury the evidence deeper or shift it elsewhere. So I smiled at dinners, asked Michael about his doomed ventures, and feigned ignorance whenever Evelyn bragged about family loyalty. But beneath the mask, I was building an arsenal that would one day dismantle them. The final piece came unexpectedly. Through a contact in Richard's firm, I discovered the existence of silent partners, wealthy investors who believed their money funded legitimate projects. In truth, their millions were being laundered through shell companies, some of which, of course, carried my name. It was more than betrayal now. It was fraud on a scale that could shatter the Harrington empire overnight. That's when I understood the importance of timing. Evidence alone wasn't enough. It had to be revealed in a way that ensured they couldn't control the narrative, couldn't bury the scandal under influence and money. The gala, with its perfect audience of investors, politicians, and community leaders, was my stage. The moment they chose to humiliate me publicly, they unwittingly delivered the cue. In the months leading up to the gala, I had already prepared the trap. I scheduled encrypted emails to journalists, timed the release of documents to prosecutors, even created anonymous social media accounts ready to spread the story once it broke. All I had to do was walk out, and the world would do the rest. The night itself unfolded exactly as I'd imagined. The chandeliers glittered, the quartet played, and Richard raised his glass to toast their legacy. When they declared to the world that they wished I'd never been born, they thought they had silenced me. In truth, they had triggered the detonation. I left without a backward glance, but as I drove into the city, I knew the first domino had already fallen. 30 minutes later, while the gala still buzzed with forced laughter and whispered gossip, the first article went live. Fraud allegations rock Harrington Enterprises, millions laundered through shell accounts. Phones began to buzz around the dining tables, champagne glasses froze mid-air, conversations faltered. I imagined Richard's confident smile stiffening, Evelyn's hand tightening on his arm as she scanned the room and saw the tide turning. The investors, their silent partners, would be the first to turn cold. Betrayal stings worst when it threatens the pocket. That was when my phone began to flood with missed calls, first one, then another. By the end of the hour, the screen lit up like a dying star. Richard, Evelyn, even Michael. Desperation poured through their voicemails, voices once sharp now frayed with panic. But I didn't answer. I never intended to. Ghosts don't return phone calls. By the time dawn broke, the story had grown teeth. News outlets picked it up. Online forums devoured it. And the Harrington name, once synonymous with wealth and prestige, was now plastered with fraud, corruption, and betrayal. Bank accounts were frozen, regulators announced investigations, and the carefully curated image of Richard and Evelyn Harrington began to crumble. For years, they had taught me that I was nothing, a shadow in their empire. But now the shadow had turned into a storm. By the time the sun rose, the Harrington estate was no longer a fortress of prestige, it was a crime scene in waiting. News vans idled outside the iron gates, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like vultures circling a carcass. Neighbors peeked through curtains hungry for scandal. The same people who had once fawned over Evelyn's designer gowns and Richard's philanthropic speeches now whispered with delight at their fall. Inside the house, panic reigned. I wasn't there, but I could imagine it vividly, the clipped tone in Richard's voice as he barked orders at his assistant, the tremor in Evelyn's hand as she tried to steady her morning martini, and Michael pacing the floor, his bravado unraveling with every headline. They must have scoured for an explanation, a scapegoat, someone to blame. But the evidence was too precise, too airtight. My evidence. At noon, black SUVs pulled into their driveway. Federal investigators stepped out, their jackets marked with bold letters that could be seen from blocks away. The Harringtons had spent decades cultivating power, shaking hands with senators and bankers, but none of that mattered when the law came knocking. Officers carted out boxes of documents, hard drives, and servers. Evelyn, who once commanded every room with her icy elegance, now stood at the threshold in her silk robe, her face pale, lips quivering under the weight of camera flashes. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but even stone cracks under enough pressure. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about fraud, embezzlement, betrayal of investors. His jaw clenched so tightly I wondered if his teeth would shatter. For the first time in my life, I imagined he felt small, cornered, powerless. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, not with their voices, but with screenshots from friends, colleagues, even strangers online. Headlines multiplied. The Empire of Lies, inside the Harrington scandal. Anonymous sources revealed intimate details only I could have provided. The world now knew what I had known for years. Behind the marble halls and charity galas, Richard and Evelyn were thieves who betrayed their own blood. Michael's role unraveled quickly. His startups, once praised as visionary, were revealed to be funnels for laundered money. Investors he had charmed with his easy smile now demanded answers. Some threatened lawsuits, others cut ties publicly. For the first time, my brother, the golden child, was no longer untouchable. I should have felt guilt. After all, I had once loved them, or at least the idea of them. But as I sat in my apartment, the city buzzing outside my window, I felt only a strange serenity. The kind you feel after years of storm finally break into clear skies. They had taken my childhood, my trust, my future. Now, I had taken back the one thing they cherished more than money: control. And yet, even as their empire collapsed, they still reached for me. Evelyn left voicemails, her tone shifting from pleading to venom in seconds. "Clara, we can fix this. Just come home." Then, moments later, "You ungrateful child, you've destroyed us. Do you know what you've done?" Richard's messages were colder, almost businesslike. "We need you as a witness. If you don't cooperate, you'll regret it." But I didn't answer. I wanted them to feel what I had felt for years: the weight of silence, the ache of being invisible. By the week's end, the Harrington name was synonymous with disgrace. Former allies vanished like smoke, business partners cut ties, and their estate was surrounded not by admirers, but by reporters and officers cataloging their downfall. They had wished me away, declared me non-existent. Now they were the ones vanishing, erased from the world they had once ruled. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale air, heavy with the tension of 100 eyes waiting for the next revelation. I sat quietly in the back row, my presence unnoticed at first, a shadow among reporters, lawyers, and curious spectators. But I wasn't there for spectacle. I was there for justice. The reckoning had arrived, and the walls that once sheltered my parents' lies now echoed with the truth. Richard sat at the defense table in a navy suit, the same kind he had worn at countless board meetings. But this time, it looked less like armor and more like a costume, an illusion that no longer convinced anyone. Evelyn was beside him, pearls clutched at her throat like a lifeline, mascara smudged from tears she had tried to disguise. Michael slouched one seat over, stripped of his bravado, staring at his hands as if answers were written in the creases of his palms. When the prosecutor rose, the room stilled. One by one, exhibits stacked higher, bank statements, forged documents, emails with digital footprints leading straight back to the Harringtons. Each page was a mirror reflecting their greed. The moment that seared itself into my memory came when the prosecutor displayed the forged loan documents, the ones in my name. My signature, replicated in precise strokes, appeared on the large screen for all to see. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Richard's jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed at his temple, and then, both of them turned. Their eyes found me in the back row. For the first time, they looked small, not powerful, not untouchable, but desperate. Their gaze pleaded with me, silently begging for an ally, for the daughter they had disowned to become their salvation. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I simply sat there, steady and silent, letting them drown in the very emptiness they had forced upon me. The silence of the child who never existed became louder than any accusation. The prosecutors pressed further, exposing how funds were siphoned into Michael's failed ventures, how Evelyn's lavish lifestyle had been bankrolled by investors' stolen money, how Richard's empire was built not on brilliance, but on deceit. Witnesses took the stand, former employees, financial analysts, even betrayed investors. Each testimony was another nail in the coffin of their legacy. At one point, Richard's lawyer tried to frame me as complicit. "Family finances are shared," he argued. "Clara benefited from the Harrington name, from the opportunities it afforded her." But the evidence spoke otherwise. Records showed my scholarship fund drained without consent, debts tied to my name that I had never touched. The truth was irrefutable, and the defense's words dissolved under the weight of facts. As the days passed, the trial became less about fraud and more about betrayal. Headlines called it the scandal that devoured a dynasty. Commentators debated how parents could sacrifice their own child for ambition. Some sympathized with me, others marveled at the precision of my revenge. But no matter the opinion, one fact remained. The Harringtons had destroyed themselves, and I had simply pulled back the curtain. When closing arguments arrived, the prosecutor's voice cut through the courtroom with surgical precision. This is not merely financial fraud. This is a story of parents who chose greed over blood, who forged their daughter's name as if she were a commodity, not a child. They wished her away. And now, justice demands they face the consequences. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. I sat unmoving, my breath shallow, the weight of years pressing down on me. When they returned, the verdict was read. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Evelyn sobbed openly. Richard's face hardened into stone. Michael muttered something under his breath, but his words were lost beneath the shuffle of reporters rushing to broadcast the fall of the Harrington dynasty. I remained seated as chaos erupted around me. For years I had been invisible, erased. But in that moment my silence was the loudest voice in the room. The verdict was only the beginning. The Harrington Empire, once a monument of marble and reputation, collapsed into rubble almost overnight. Bank accounts were seized, properties liquidated, and the family name, once spoken with reverence at country clubs and charity galas, became a punchline whispered in scandalous tones. Richard was sentenced to federal prison. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with a glance now wore an orange jumpsuit and stood in line for meals like any other inmate. Evelyn received house arrest at first, though the gossip columns delighted in describing how she lived not in a mansion, but in a monitored condo stripped of luxury. Michael, who had fled abroad during the investigation, was extradited within months. His arrest was broadcast live, handcuffs clinking as reporters swarmed, his carefully curated charm replaced by a hollow stare. And me? For the first time in my life, I breathed freely. There were no more midnight calls filled with manipulation, no more family sacrifices demanded at my expense, no more invisible chains tethering me to their empire. I had my own apartment, small, but mine, its walls untainted by their voices. I started therapy, peeling back the scars they had etched into me, learning that survival was not the same as living. But freedom alone wasn't enough. I wanted something greater than revenge. I wanted purpose. So when restitution funds became available, money recovered from frozen accounts and liquidated assets, I petitioned for part of it. Not to enrich myself, but to create something new, a foundation for children betrayed by the very people meant to protect them. Foster youth, scapegoated children, those erased by the families who should have loved them. The Harrington Betrayal Fund, some called it. Though I gave it a gentler name, the Renewal Trust. For every dollar my parents had stolen from me, I gave tenfold back to children who would otherwise grow up believing they were worthless. In a way, I became the parent I had needed, offering others what Richard and Evelyn had denied me. Years later, people still ask if I ever spoke to them again, if I visited Richard in prison, if I answered Evelyn's desperate letters, if I forgave Michael for being complicit in my erasure. The answer is always the same, spoken with the same calm I carried out of that ballroom. No, because I don't exist in their world anymore. They declared me non-existent, and I honored their wish. But here's the twist they never saw coming. In erasing me, they erased themselves. Their wealth, their reputation, their legacy, gone. While I, the ghost they tried to banish, became more alive than ever. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the gala, the chandeliers, the quartet, the sting of champagne on my tongue. I replay their words. We wish Clara had never been born. And then I remember my reply. Then consider me as if I never existed. It was not just a declaration. It was a prophecy. They wanted me gone, and I granted their wish. But unlike them, I learned something profound in the void they left behind. Erasure is not the end. It can also be the beginning. Today, I live without the weight of their shadows. Free. reborn. And while they count the cost of their greed behind locked doors and tarnished names, I build a life defined not by their betrayal, but by my survival. That is the cost of wishing away a child.